everyone.
Hello.
Hello, welcome to Season 2, Episode 18 of Inside the Rookery. This is the very last episode of Season 2, and it's a special one, as we have two guests on the panel, and we're also being hosted on World Anvil's Twitch. So welcome to everybody.
Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Unusually, I'll also give myself, Andy and Graham a chance to do introductions, as well as Janet and Dmitri, as some of the people from World Anvil probably don't know us. So I'm Lindsay Law. I'm a writer, proofreader, all-round company grown-up at Rookery Publications. And I also am the regular host of Inside the Rookery, which is a weekly stream where we Rooks take people behind the curtain and give you an insight into how your favourite games are created. Rookery Publications itself is a group of 5 industry veterans: Andy Lott, myself, Graham Davis, Mark Gibbons, and Andy Leask, and we create system-agnostic role-playing supplements for all your favourite games. Today we're joined by Dmitri and Janet. Over to you both to introduce yourselves.
That's us.
Yeah, it's you.
It is.
Hey, Demetrius, who are you?
I am Dmitris. I am the CTO of World Anvil. I coded World Anvil. I am also a kind of RPG creator, I guess, and a world builder for many years. And yeah, that's what I do. I actually spend my days coding World Anvil and then helping people with world building. And Janet is apparently a pirate with a parrot cat.
I'm Janet, and this is my parrot cat. Oh goodness, sorry. I'm being really very loved. So I'm Janet. I'm the other half of the founder team of World Anvil. I do everything that is not coding, including managing the marketing, running the community, making the coffee, managing the cat beasts. When I'm not doing that, I'm a writer. I wrote this Dark Crystal RPG, and I also write novels and other fun stuff. I've written a bunch of RPG bits and pieces, and there's a lot more to come that I can't talk about right now. Exciting.
Excellent. Andy?
Oh, me. Hi, I'm Andy. I'm the chief ringmaster and whipper of things here at Rookery Publications. I'm a games designer. I designed Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, for example, most recent edition. I'm a cartographer. I have mapped for Critical Role, for example, or Call of Cthulhu. And I'm a general doer of all things. I will pretty much try anything gaming related. And I have recently been, indeed, on the World Anvil streams, where you may have seen me already.
Yay.
I shall now pass down to Graham.
As to Graham, who's second-hand samurai says, Graham Davis has written some of my favourite things. So there you go, Graham. No
That's
pressure.
very nice of you. Yeah. Well, I'm the managing editor here at the Rookery, which means I write some of the words and I check over a lot of the words. And let me see. I was working on Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 1st edition, and just did a bunch of stuff for 4th as well. When I'm not doing tabletop stuff, I work in computer games mostly, and I also have a little sideline resurrecting stories from the past. Like I just put together an anthology of female pioneers of horror fiction and stuff like that.
I have a copy. It's awesome.
I was about to say I would like to read this.
Love that.
Yeah, it's great.
Actually, I think you'll find I have a copy. As it was a present from me, from Graham. It was merely delivered by you, Andy Law.
No,
so,
it's true.
So what do we
have
do
a
on
word
Inside?
for this. Sorry.
Yeah?
I was going to say, Demetrius and I have a word for this. It is mowers. We had to create a whole separate word to deal with the fact that we both own things, but now we own things together. So yeah, common problem.
Mowers.
Mowers.
Very nice. I think I may
It's
steal
Mowers.
Now it's mowers.
So what will we do today on Inside the Rookery? Well, today we're going to be talking about Agile Worldbuilding. As always, our Patreons and our friends on our Discord server have been pre-submitting questions that we will bring up and we will answer for you. And as always, if you would like to make any comments or questions to add to the stream, pop them in the chat. And I think usually I look at the chat, but I think tonight Andy will be looking at the chat. So it may be slightly exciting when they come up on screen when I'm not expecting creating them. And also one final disclaimer, Andy and I, and both our children, both have COVID right now. So this may be even more shambolic and chaotic than usual. Sorry.
Excuse me while I go. There we go.
So
nice and clear.
The first question is from a regular on the Inside the Rookery with excellent questions every week from Kilishandra, who asks, what is Agile world building in comparison to normal world building?
Janet,
and I hope that Janet might want to take this first.
Yeah, I'll hop in on this one. So normal world building has two basic approaches. It's top down or it's bottom up. This is sort of by the book. So top down is, I am a god, I create all the systems. It's very system focused. You create big swathes of land. You create pantheons if there are pantheons, hierarchies and systems and governments, and then you work your way down to the people. And the things and the actual stuff that will be in your story, whatever your story, how media your story is coming across in. And then there's the other method, the bottom up method, which is I'm creating this dude in this place who's doing this thing. Everything else doesn't exist until I've decided it exists. So it's bottom up and top down. The problem with these two approaches, oh God, they're multiplying. I've got so many cats. The problem with these two approaches is essentially from top down, you end up doing so much world building up front that you often struggle to get to the stuff that's really going to be in your story, or your game, your novel, your computer game. With bottom up, you're often going to fall into a trap we call Mosaic world building, which is, here is a chunk of world building over here. This is my fire realm. And here is a chunk of world building over here. This is my fairy elf realm. They don't communicate. They've got nothing in common. There's no borders with sort of transitive cultural bleed. There's no trade. There's no logical connection between these two places. They are essentially biomes. One might be on the moon, for all I know. There's no real integration between them. And so that's the foibles of bottom up. So what Agile world building seeks to do is start with all the benefits that you get from that big structure, and then leave that as a lean scaffolding and go right down to, okay, what do I need to build now first to get my story going? And that's one of the reasons that we always suggest it for game masters, because when you're writing a novel, you have control over the main characters. You can pretty much tell them what to do. Sometimes they resist, we hit them on the head, we go on. It's fine. As a GM, you cannot hit your players on the head and tell them what to do. Bad GM.
What?
You have to let them make choices.
That's a case by case, I think.
You have to let them be an active part of the storytelling process, which means you don't always know what they're going to do. So you don't always know what you need to create. By having the big scaffolding at the top, that gives you a basic guideline of how the world works and where things are. And by creating what's right at the bottom, that allows you to spin. I always think of it as the Wallace and Gromit scene where there's a toy train going along the track, and the person right at the front is laying down track as the train is going. That's how it feels like as a GM. But if you have the big structure, you know where the train track is going to go. You know what to avoid. You know where to steer to. And if they go somewhere unexpected, well, you have the rules of the world. You have the basic scaffolding. So nowhere is too unexpected. You have guidelines. So that's the basic difference between top down, bottom up, and agile world building. Agile world building is what we recommend. And having talked to Andy, it seems to be what Andy does as well. Right?
It is. It was fascinating, actually, because when we were discussing what we could discuss for today, agile world building came up because it's very much part and parcel of what they're doing just now, and they're focusing on. And as they discussed what they were doing, I was like, because I, broadly speaking, completely agree with literally everything Janet has just said, to the point that I fear that there's little else that I can add beyond yes, Gov, completely agree, spot on. Because you need the space, to add a little bit extra, to do your track laying. And the more that you've done your top-down approach, the less space that you allow yourself sometimes. And you also need the space to ensure that things can be dynamic and interesting, particularly if you're running a game rather than writing a book. If you're running a game, particularly, it is a shared experience, a shared endeavor. And if it is something that the GM is strictly controlling, it can often be, not always, but can often be less exciting for the players to be involved with. So having that track going as you go, being agile, reacting to what is required at the table rather than what you think will be required by the world is, generally speaking, also better use of your time. Because you're not creating vast tracts of stuff that no one's going to visit or see. Yeah. And whilst that's awesome and super cool for you, it's also possibly a big waste of time.
It could take you most of the rest of your life. And also it's bound to be rife with things that you will regret having done.
And that's actually where the system came into play, because I come from coding and development, of course. So effectively, Agile for me was a very important part of my life, and understanding the methodologies that will make it happen. Because, okay, yes, we said, you write a bit of the top and you write then at the bottom is what you will be doing at the end. But the tricks and tips that you have to follow in order to go there correctly is what we're trying to develop with Janet. Essentially, the idea, for example, of a cycle that the simple idea that we have and we say to everybody is, in simple words, if you want to write about a city and nobody has visited that city, or don't have to go to that city anymore, just write 2 paragraphs about it maximum, because this is the core. You can write 2 paragraphs for 100 cities. You don't want to write 2 pages for each city, for example, because that would be too much. And that's actually, again, too much, but it was an example of that, because that will give you the opportunity to create those connections that we lost. Jana talked about trade before and how actually there is no trade. I mean, there is trade. Like even in World of Warcraft, for example, that you have the mother load of essentially literally patchwork world building. Exactly, like the desert lands and the jungle lands and the flying people who have hundreds of levels of technology higher than the other ones. They are literally opposite to each other, but no connection between them. The ones are savages and the others like high-tech society. Like don't these people see what the others are doing, kind of thing, on the left-hand side of the map, kind of thing. But the trick is to say, okay, if I have written a paragraph or 2 for each of the cities, then at least I can say, you know what, there is a trade route there, which means that ideas, philosophies, religion, ways of working, clothing would have moved from one place to another. Maybe the rich people of that city actually are using the materials bought from the other. So these small connections is what makes actually world building alive. This is what makes it feel real, because in the real world, I mean, we know it now more than ever with globalization, things bleed within each other, and that is the trick. You need to find a way to write a little bit for each of it, so you have the idea, but not having spent hundreds and hundreds of hours. And as your players move to a city, or they're moving in a city, maybe these 2 paragraphs may happen to become 4 paragraphs, because you have to prepare, and maybe you have to talk about the major locations in the city you haven't talked about before. And this is how we actually start. And the idea was that if you're a game master, for example, and you start with a game and you do session 0, which I hope that everybody does here, in the session 0, you interview your players. You understand what is important for them. The things that are important for your players, you should write another 2 paragraphs for. Because for that city that he went to the university, he will know 2 paragraphs more than anybody else, because he knows where, for example, the bar with all the cool people is, or where you buy actually this weird thing in that city. Because you know what? He was 5 years there in university. He knows this shit. Everybody else won't, but he will. So you have to write about it, but not about everything else, because nobody will need it.
I did wonder when I first saw Agile Worldbuilding, because I just saw it out of context. I think the book, I think I saw an advert for the book, and I did wonder how much it had its roots and some, I don't know, DNA from Agile in technology. And I would imagine that many a GM has been rapidly trying to prepare for a night session and coming to the conclusion that their minimum viable product is somewhat more minimum than they thought at the start of their time preparing.
Absolutely.
Every time.
It's a really nice way of putting it. And actually, we have sort of 2 versions of the Agile methodology, one of which is for novel writers and one of which is for game masters. And because when you're game mastering by consent of the players, session by session, right? Then it is so close to that Agile process. We even use the Agile cycle, which is, play and then go away and digest that work and then dream about what can come next, and then build and plan just a little bit more, and then throw it on the table and see what happens, which is essentially a refinement of that
The
agile
agile circle.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So you mentioned there about cooperative and collaborative between in role playing between GMs and players. So Francesco has popped a question in the chat. Francesco, a previous guest of ours. Hello.
Hey,
What do you
Francesco.
think? What do you think about cooperative world building, as seen in some less traditional role playing games, for example?
Dimi can answer this question while I go get a really good book that I want to recommend.
Of course. Go
I
for
Is that
it.
okay? I am
gathered that
obsessed
you
with
will.
books. You'll learn this very soon.
Yes. So first of all, we love cooperative world building, and I think that in the modern world there are so many systems actually that are coming that kind of made it part of their system. Cooperative world building. Of course, no. I mean, Dungeons and Dragons is not really built to be a cooperative game. It's really like handheld by the GM in most cases. But that doesn't matter. If you're a game master who wants to cooperate with your players, what I do, for example, is that at the end of each session, I will ask my players, how did you find it? What do you think? Would you like to write a little bit about it with me, for example? Like, okay, we have said that these guys from this Thieves Guild and you're supposed to be great to that. Shall we sit down and talk about it a little bit? Shall we write a little bit about it? And I think it's a beautiful way because the world which started to become was yours becomes more and more a thing of the party. And that is very powerful because, first of all, it will hook your players, right? Everybody who is invested in something is more invested if they have actually put their little mittens in that. And next time somebody else will play in your world, you find out that the people who you played before are actually part of the world. Their ideas, their thoughts, their processes are now part of the world that you've created. Janet?
So, collaborative world building is amazing. Collaborative world building with your players is incredible, in my opinion. I freaking love it. Being able to get your players invested in your world is really exciting. And it can be as little as Stars and Wishes, which in my opinion are, let's take the game this way. That's what Stars and Wishes are all about, or favorite moments or anything like that. That's the players going, I love this. Can I have more of that? All the way to, all right, we walk into a room. It looks like this. What do you think is in here? Or, we're coming up to a city. What does it look like? And inviting them into the process. But if you want to go full collaborative world building, there is a professor in Rochester Institute of Technology called Dr. Trent Hergenreder. He is an amazing human being, but also he has created this book, Collaborative World Building for Writers and Gamers. It is fantastic. It's not very chunky. It is published by, it's a Bloomsbury one, published by Bloomsbury. And if you want to do full collaborative world building, this is a fantastic method that puts it down step by step, really takes you through, works you through the pain points. What do you do if there's too many ideas? How do you work through this? How do you create your gazette? How do you do this, that, and the other? It's very, very good. If you are interested, massive recommend. And even if you're not into collaborative world building, it's a very interesting world building read.
For world building,
I'm not paid
exactly,
to say
yeah.
this, just to be clear.
No,
I just think the book is excellent.
Yeah, we love the book. We fell in love with it when we read it.
You sure you weren't paid?
I promise. Trent is a friend. He also loves World Anvil. So I will say that. He actually recommends World Anvil in the book. And then he came to talk to us afterwards.
Nice.
Yeah.
So the book came out.
had no
and he
idea.
was like, by the way, I talked about you in my book. Is that all right? And we were like, oh, that's really cool. And then, yeah. But he's wonderful. He does all sorts of really, really fascinating work teaching world building at RIT.
Also,
I was just going to say I've never heard 2 stars and a wish in a role-playing context before, and I think that's adorable.
I was about to say that Trent might have the best professor's office you've ever seen in your life, because it might be small, but it has a bookcase and it's filled with RPG books only. Which is incredible if you go to university. Can you imagine being a student at university going there? It's like Dungeons and Dragons, the full list kind of thing.
So, Lindsay, that's interesting. You talked about 2 stars and a wish, and I just Googled it, and this is a classroom thing, right?
Yeah, it is, yeah.
Okay, so Stars and Wishes is not a million miles away from that, and it's something that I've seen at different tables before. It's essentially you encourage people to say, okay, I love this. This was a star moment for me. And if I could have anything in the game going forward, it would be so-and-so. So I do a stream game on Fridays. My star was one of the player moments that was just absolutely spectacular. Oh, we got a mimic ship. That was a star. our ship is a mimic. We're having a great time. It's completely crazy. And my wish was, I'd love to have a little bit more time for this scene, for this thing that's going on over here.
Mm-hmm.
But that is actually steering the game. Like, these wishes are ways that players can say, I want more of this. And again, the stars, we have a mimic ship. I am up for that. That tells the GM, okay, the ridiculousness level, the big epic level, I'm really enjoying that. Let's have more of that. And that's why I bring it as an example of a very small example of how players can actually be involved in steering the game.
Yeah, I think it's a great idea. I think we'll move on to Juniper's question. What is your preferred way to start world building?
We're laughing because this is sort of a number one question for us. We've actually created, as part of Agile Worldbuilding, a meta section where you can go through essentially the scaffolding that I was talking about. And it's basically a questionnaire. It starts with, what's your motivation? Why are you building the world? Do you want to scare the crap out of your players? Do you want to create something that is eminently publishable? Do you have a deadline and a brief? That is a motivation too. I see you, Graham. I see you.
Oh, yes.
So, like, why are you building? And then what's the genre? What's the player feel? What's the agency? What's the tone? So, like, the really big stuff. And it basically works you down to, how is your world geographically different, like conceptually different to our world? How are the
physics different, for example, or not?
Yeah.
Like, which are the metaphysical or physical laws that are different in the world?
Exactly. Who used to live here, and what's their story? Who lives here now, and what do they all want from each other, or what do they need? Because you're already creating dynamic systems then. Just all of this bullet points, little tiny bullet points. The dwarves live in the mountain, but they actually need to leave because it's crumbling, so they're looking to expand south. The elves live in the major forest, and they hate everybody else, and actually they just want everybody else to go away. Now you have a conflict.
And that's the point.
That's actually where I start. Conflicts and stories.
Yeah.
Effectively, I think conflict stories are the biggest part of the meta, but we just gave a bit of the base of the world before, so you actually put into context, and that was the point behind it.
Yeah.
I
think the big thing is having... Oh, sorry.
Oh, no, go.
I think the big thing is having conflicts that are appropriate for your story, appropriate for your world, sorry. And that's why I think establishing genre is really important. So one of the things Dimmy and I talk about is, if you have a perfect world, the conflict has to come from outside. Because there can't be any conflict. If it's a true utopia, there's no conflict inside the world. So that's an example where understanding the world that you've built helps you understand what kind of conflict. If you're making a grimdark world, that's going to guide your conflict. If you're making a bright high fantasy world, that's going to guide your conflict. Yes, okay, they're interdimensional interlopers, but are they aliens, or are they demons, or are they, amorphous jellyfish people that just want to be friends? These are the questions that help guide the conflict, and that's why we suggest setting down your genre, setting down your tone first, to make sure that your conflict is in line with your motivations.
But even in a grimdark world, for example, that actually, it has, of course, conflict kind of like baked in. There are scales of gray, right? Because if everything is bad, this is the baseline.
Yeah.
You still need something that is even worse in order to create conflict. Like, that's the point, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you know it better than anybody, Graham. I mean, it's really a question about it.
That's true. Yes. If everything's terrible, then effectively nothing is terrible. There's no contrast.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We've talked about that a lot before, haven't we, on the stream screen, where we've talked about the genesis of the Warhammer world and how you injected some of that, like, silly humor and puns and plays on words into it to provide that contrast, because the Warhammer world is a pretty grim, dark, perilous place of chaos. But I was interested to see what Games Workshop then did with Age of Sigmar, where they kind of started with the conflict because, surprise, they were making a battle game, and then kind of filled in the world building afterwards, because it literally was just like spheres and they fought each other. But then as that world has built, and as they've brought the role-playing game into it, they have built more of the world. And it feels like that world, the Age of Sigmar world, was built in a really different way to say how you built the Warhammer world the first time round.
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, to say that the Warhammer world was built the first time around is something of an exaggeration. It was, before I got hired to put together a Warhammer fantasy roleplay, it was driven by the needs of individual products. So, for example, there was a battle box that was a parody on Macbeth. So, yeah, there's an area that's a bit like Scotland. That's right. And there's one with orcs, and okay, orcs are a bit like this. And it was the bubbles that Janet was talking about, somehow we needed a world chapter in Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, so I needed to connect the bubbles somehow. And that's how that came about, plus an awful lot of silly humor and a little bit of a revolt against the management, I have to say, because the whole grimdark thing was imposed from above. So we were, as freshly minted graduates, full of silly humor and unable to take large pieces of it seriously. And this came out in our work.
Love that.
And we kind of justified that ex post facto by saying, oh yes, it was a conscious design decision because without light and dark everything's grey, and it became one of the guiding tenets of the game, at least in that edition. But
I always found that a fascinating part of it, though, because regardless of its genesis, it became a core component of what Warhammer games very much presented, where to ensure that the dark was really dark, there was some strong and often ridiculous comedy that came hand in hand with it. Very British and leaning as well. You can feel the Blackadder and the Pratchett leaning through. And then comparing that with the horrible Murkochian chaos disaster zones that were also presented. And it meant as a player, you had so many different things that you could latch onto. But also individual groups could focus on the areas that they liked. So for some people, Warhammer was a game of farce and humor, where for other people, it was dark and grim and bitter and horrible. And every night was just the worst. And for other people, there was a nice contrast of dark and light as they made their way through it. And I think that was to its strength, and to a degree came from its world building, which was not necessarily consistent to begin with.
No, I'm going to move us on. I'm going to move us on because we've got loads of questions to get through that were pre-submitted. But there's one from the chat from Slashed Wings. Do you build stories around your world, or do you build your world based off the events of your stories?
Oh, dear God.
How do you even start?
So I actually want to borrow the words of my good friend, Dr. Trent Hagenrader. And what he told me, and I went, oh my God, you're so right. It was one of those like, oh my God moments, is that the most common mistake he sees in world building is when somebody builds the world around the story and around the main character. He does a lot of writing, and then it feels like there is no world beyond the main character. Everything is contrived around the main character. We call it Mary Sue world building. The same way you get a Mary Sue character, you can get Mary Sue world, and it's built around the character, or in gaming cases, it's built around the party. So everything is about the party. There's no other conflict that's not related to the party's backstory, for example. Like everything is about the fact that he's the son of the lost king, and he has been cursed for 17 generations, and so is actually a secret water princess, and people are coming for her. This is all the conflict that the party experience, and they never experience conflict that's outside of them. So I would say, in terms of building your stories around, building your world around the events of your stories, just be careful, because it can give you a very sort of myopic view of your world if you do that. I always felt like Stardust is like that. I love Stardust. It's a great film and a great book that it's based on. But it really does feel like that world is incredibly tiny, and they just go from plot place to plot place, and it's fun and it's a romp. But it really doesn't feel like a fully realized world. It's a real writer mistake, I think. It's something that GMs can fall into, but it's a real writer mistake.
I will be controversial now, but I will say that Lord of the Rings is one of those stories that, although it has very expanded... I love I love Tolkien, but give me a second. I'll explain it. Okay. So it's one of those stories that actually build the world around it. And the reason I believe this is the case is not because the world is not written a lot. I mean, of course, I love Silmarillion. Silmarillion probably is more favorite than actually the Lord of the Rings for me. But if you think about it, if you wanted to play an adventure in Lord of the Rings, you can never be the hero.
Yeah.
You have already been one-upped and before you even started.
That's true. Yeah. Taking Lord of the Rings in isolation, I would agree with you. It's only with the Silmarillion and the subsequent works that the world actually got built out beyond the immediate needs of the story, and it can be,
because the first stage is completely different than the fourth stage, like completely different. Like not even when we're talking about the same world.
I am not allowed to talk about Tolkien. Because I hate my hatred for Tom Bombadil is so overriding that I'm not allowed to talk about Tolkien. So I'm just going to be quiet.
Okay, moving on, because I know, Janet, you might have a few notes on this one that you can give your wisdom on. So Roderick has asked, give us your clickbait. You won't believe these 5 mistakes novice GMs make in their world building takes, please. Take it away, Janet.
We have a list of that. Janet,
so I have a list of 10.
Even better.
I've written it as an article. I wrote a list of 3 for NaNoWriMo. They asked me to write a guest blog post for them. I've written a list of 10 as well in an article because we help a lot of our own world builders. We have sessions with our world builders where we act as consultants. So we've seen a lot of things that we think we can help with. And my top 5 are, you've heard some of these already, World Builder's Disease. I shall explain in a minute. Mosaic world building. That's the Fire Nation, Elf Nation, random things that have no interaction with each other. Mary Sue world building, which I also talked about already. Everything and the kitchen sink world building, which is exactly what it sounds like, where somebody's gone so mad, they're like, I'm just going to put all the genres and all the hooks and all the adventure elements and all the things into one setting, and that's going to make it really cool, right? And you're reading through it, and you're like, but I don't know how to do, how do I interact with the setting? It just gets very, very overwhelming. You don't know what flavor they're going for. And the final one is world building culture and monoliths. I hate it. Yeah. Should I explain what world builder's disease is?
Yeah, I just have to, before you do, I just have to bring up Francesco's comment, of course. I definitely do not agree on Tolkien. In fact, Francesco has an RPG book to suggest to our guests.
Is that Adventures in Middle Earth?
No, would it be any chance be The One Ring?
The One Ring?
Yes, indeed.
So I haven't played One Ring. I have played Adventures in Middle Earth. In fact, I did a promo game for Adventures in Middle Earth, and I also did a review of Adventures in Middle Earth. I freaking love it. I think they handle it so well. They got around the problems of the most powerful characters already exist, so sucks to be you. Which is basically what Dimmy's issue was. I think they've handled it just beautifully. As I say, I have not played the One Ring, but Adventures in Middle Earth, I personally really enjoyed that book, that world, the way they represented Arda.
Well, we can recommend The One Ring, and I know a lot of Rookery regulars are big fans of it. So please do check it out if you haven't encountered it.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, you're taking notes.
Yeah. We have a new bookcase being built. We need books for it and time to read them.
No, time to read them. That's always the problem. I will say that the most powerful characters already existing in Sucks to Be You worked out pretty well for Wolfrup.
Yeah, did. Indeed, they almost made it the shtick. See all those great characters beating living pants out of each other in battlefields.
Yeah.
You're a peasant.
That's right.
You're a rat catcher. You are the lowest of the low. But also, without you, the entire world will probably fall apart.
I was about to say that, though, because there's a difference between who you are. The question is what you can become.
Indeed.
Because, for example, you can never become Gandalf. By definition, you cannot become Gandalf, for example, right? It's a Maya. It's not even in your plane of existence kind of thing. Yeah. But that is what I'm saying, actually. If the aspiration is there and the possibilities are actually, this is an epic story. It's the story from rags to riches or from nothing to everything. That's beautiful. Lord of the Rings, though, it's kind of a bit of a punishing world in general. It beats you down to your knees and then some more.
It's supposed to be. Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it is in the tradition of the Norse sagas because nothing nice ever happens to anyone in any of them.
That's
It's
true.
just like a constant parade of death in shipwrecks, death in battle, death by poison, death by the gods. It's just a constant
Death by
parade.
his
of
mother
Yeah.
as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's, yeah, and that's another thing that sort of was behind Wolfrock. We were reacting against D&D, which of course its main influence, it claimed Tolkien, you know, and it claimed Robert E. Howard, but honestly, it was Disneyland. It was the Hollywood Middle Ages, men in tights, you know, the whole bit where everything was bright and shiny and clean and morally unambiguous, and but in our post-punk state of mind, we could not be having that.
Just before we go into the next question, we should go back to Janet to find out the answer to was it World Builder's disease? That's the one.
World Builder's disease. Yeah.
Yes.
So,
Elven shoes.
yeah. Okay. So, World Builder's disease essentially is the compulsion to keep building your setting in increasing detail, even more detail than you need and than is useful. You just feel compelled to do it. So the example I always use is elven shoes. Okay, you have elves. They wear shoes. Great. One line. You have elves and they wear shoes and they're important in a plot point. This elf is wearing the wrong shoes at a ball and therefore you know he's the imposter. Great. If you write a 500-page treatise about the development of elven shoe fashion through the last 5 centuries and it is not directly relevant to your plot, then honey, you got World Builder's disease.
Oh, yes.
I know a lot of people with
In there.
World Builder's disease.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
contracted it for quite some time.
Yeah. Yeah.
Andy, is it true that you have a blog that's just entirely different horse species?
Yes.
Or
Yes, I
breeds?
do.
Yeah.
I hate to break it to you, I think you might have World Builder's disease.
And I think the World Builder's disease spread for it is one of the most looked at articles on the blog, consistently outdoing, for example, the Critical Role blog about how I built one of their maps, and that just blows my mind.
People
I
like
guess
detail.
people like detail.
I was going to say, it's not necessarily a bad thing if you can leverage it or if you're enjoying it. Because you know what? If you want to write 500 species of horse and you've got nothing better to do it. Do the thing. Go and enjoy yourself.
Yeah.
The problem is the deadline is creeping closer or your game is tomorrow.
You
You
have
have not created the encounters. You are not ready, but you are compulsively penning out different patterns on butterflies' wings. Then
Awesome.
Oh, yes. Yeah, that's
So
Trying to run a session with that now.
yeah.
yeah, exactly.
I have to bring up this comment. Do you have World Builder's disease? Ask your doctor if Agile Worldbuilding is right for you.
Bonnie Juju is one of
I'm
my
curious
regulars.
about
I
this.
see you, Bonnie Juju. That's
Very
going in the
nice.
book.
So, Kilishandra asks, of all the worlds you've encountered, played in, or read about, which could be quite a number, I would imagine, which is your favourite from the perspective of the originality of its world building?
Oh dear.
Wow.
Well,
Mortal Engines.
oh.
The
Proper
Mortal
missile.
Engines. I absolutely adored the Mortal Engines. The idea of this is the one about cities that eat each other in a post-apocalyptic world. The movie was, in my opinion, atrocious. I hated it. I hated everything about it. I went and read the book afterwards. The book is spectacular. It's middle grade, so don't expect, mellifluous flowing prose, but it's really well written. The exposition is incredibly skillfully handled, and the world is really interesting. It's just really cool. Cities that eat each other. It's cool.
I like Expanse. I think that is a really, really well thought out, well detailed potential for where humans could and would go in the future. Like it just, I think I watched the series first, like a few episodes, and then Andy bought me the books, and then I read pretty much all of the books, although I got a bit stuck on the last one. And I just all the way through it, I was like, yeah, you've really thought about how like how this would work and the technology that you'd need, but balanced out with the frailties of humanity and the different factions you would have as humanity started to fragment, but then countries became irrelevant. Just really interesting and really original. And I understand that originally it was based on a role-playing campaign, and I think that is testament to how rich worlds can be built through role-playing and through collaboration, because some of those details, I have no doubt, came out and were built and developed gradually, rather than an author just sitting down and being like, right, I need a world. 5,000 years ago, a cataclysm happened. We've been doing this since then, and now the local baker's boy is going to have to save the world. Right, go.
Yeah. Sad but true.
Yeah.
I will completely agree with you, Lindsay. I fell in love with the world of the Expanse, first of all. And I would like to say that it has a very good trick that the books do. It's not shown at all in the TV series because it's a visual medium, but in the first book and a half, like the first book and the second book a bit, they put a lot of importance on the mechanics, like the mechanics of actually zero G. Like, how does it work? What does it mean to live in there? What does it mean to actually to sleep, to walk, to be hit on a space, or for example, acceleration? And how does it work? Because that made every single book and every single encounter so much richer, because they have established essentially the meta in writing within the first book and a half. Because then you knew, like by the third book, when you were seeing a battle, you knew what the problem is going to be, like the acceleration problems, the reaching the target, how the missiles will move around the planet essentially to hit something, what it means, for example, to accelerate very quickly, or what it means for somebody to hit you while you're in zero G, which is incredible because it made a very alive world and a very alive setting, even if you were reading it.
Yeah, and my biggest bugbear about loads of settings is, and I understand why there aren't necessarily like children or explorations of education and what it's like to grow up, because it is a tricky area to then think about. Like, well, I know that Games Workshop for a while were like, no, you cannot, you just don't even have children, let alone like harm a child. But I think the Expanse had thought about that because, what does it mean if you're pregnant in space? What does it mean to grow up in space? And they'd actually taken the time to consider that in a way that lots of worlds, I think that's where the authors often fail in worlds, when they fail to think about, right, well, how would someone grow up through this world? What would it actually be like for a young person to become an adult? And I think the Expanse did that really well.
So I'm judging on that one. I'm going to go in a completely different direction with something that I thought was not necessarily the most original, but took so many different source material, put it together and created something that has been enormously influential on pretty much, well, a huge chunk of role-playing, if nothing else, and that's Anne Rice's Vampires. World building that was quite unlike any previous monster, which before that it was very much the Warner Brothers version of Dracula, or Hammer Horror or something similar. It was an in-depth character examination of the real people that lay behind them, and pretty much spawned an entire genre by itself. And
I think,
as world building goes, it's something that is not the classic Moorcock that everyone would expect me to say. But yeah, vampire.
I think Lestat kind of became the primary character for all vampires from that point onwards.
Yeah.
Like
Oh,
Lestat
definitely. Yeah.
altered the world of what a vampire is as a character.
In a similar fashion to how Tolkien completely changed how fantasy writing was dealt post-Tolkien. Everybody looked to him and everybody was creating elves and dwarves and halflings and humans.
That's true.
I thought that one of the most interesting characters in the vampire novels was Lestat's mum, whose name I forget. But she was really cool.
Gabrielle.
And she was Gabrielle, and really interesting. And obviously, like, the author had thought about what it meant to be a woman in that time period, and some of the choices she made were quite controversial. And then in the films, she just basically none of that complexity comes through, nothing. And I think that was a big shame, because she, for me, was one of the best characters in that whole series.
Yeah, and going back to what you said earlier, Lindsay, about children, I forget this character's name, but there was one who was made into a vampire at the age of about 10, and after 100 years or so of life was getting pretty damn sick of still being a child.
Was it like Claudia?
Claudia was one of the characters.
That's right. Yeah. Well, for my choice about favorite world building, I'm going to go completely left field, and it's David Bowie's album Diamond Dogs.
Oh, awesome.
Which I first heard at a very impressionable age. And it was the first time I'd seen anything really come together and create a world out of the whole cloth, and it was a concept album, but it wasn't prog. And this whole sort of post-apocalyptic thing was pretty new back then. And it just created an atmosphere I could look beyond the songs to see the rest of the world out there.
Talking about world building in music, I probably you don't know this band, but there was a band, or there is still a band called Gamma Ray, and a long time ago they created an album called Somewhere Out in Space, and The Land of the Free. 2 different albums. Both of them actually have obviously their own worlds, because the one talks about actually an ancient race of like pharaoh-like creatures that came down to earth and enslaved the people with machines, and how actually the people rebel against their masters. It's like Stargate, exactly.
It's Stargate. I know this well.
Yeah. And it is absolutely wonderful. And the other one is actually about a silly generational ships going through space, and how it actually the political unrest changes the history of this incredible world building, and it's just actually like lyrics in 12 songs in an album, and that's gone kind of thing.
Andy Law loves some songs that are like a whole album of like concept in music. Interstellar, Universal,
the Intergalactic Touring Band.
Yeah,
it's called the Intergalactic Touring Band from the 70s. Meatloaf sings one of the songs, and it's just beautiful. World building interlaced throughout the entirety of the album. I love it.
It's the same. It's got like generation ships and stuff, and we're building a starship, and it's all like hopeful. And then the generations have gone, and while the generation ships have been built, they've built faster than light travel. So all these generation ships get there, and then at the other end, there's already a colony, and they're all welcomed home. And I'm getting emotional just thinking about it.
That's an amazing story.
Nice.
So. Next question from Juniper. What do you like making more? Top level states, cities, single buildings, NPCs, monsters, or something else?
I think, at least in my world, because I'm building one right now, my monsters, although there are many, are the people more than anything else. So based on that, I will say I like to create people who are monsters in the true definition of what the monster is, because then the rest of the heroes can become heroic by actually defeating the fears and the pains inside of them and the monsters themselves.
Very nice.
Good answer.
I have 2 answers. The one is for novels and the one is for RPGs. So for novels, I love creating character arcs. I know it's not a thing, but character arcs to me are super interesting. So anything about a character progressing, growing, all of that stuff, and then everything that goes around that. So any physical, visual thing I can create that will represent that. In an early novel I wrote, I had a guy with a hawk. At some point, the hawk died, and he had this. Funny enough, Macbeth. We've mentioned him already tonight. It was a Macbeth arc tragedy, and he had this hawk, and at some moment the hawk died, and that was the moment that he literally just went off the cliff into Macbeth style madness at the end. But when I'm writing RPGs, I'm a people pleaser. I love giving players things that give them joy. That's what I love building. I love building armor that makes them go, oh my god, I'm so much more awesome. I love building pets. I love building feats. I love building things that grow with them.
Oh, Andy loves building a mini game. So if there was, say, something that our characters had to do, like there's a gambling den, or there's a competition to become the patriarch of the 8 colleges of magic in Warhammer, Andy has a mini game for that, and we get to like have a special breakout RPG session. Sometimes they go on for some time. Sometimes the mini games have their own mini games. So the supreme patriarch of the 8 colleges of magic has a gambling mini game alongside it, in which we can gamble on the outcome.
That's awesome.
It's like mini games, the inception of mini games. Amazing.
Okay,
I know I
so
answered for him. Yeah.
I am so with you there. I've written a whole in the Dark Crystal RPG. I wrote a whole Landstrider point-to-point race where in the game you ride Landstriders point to point, and there are obstacles and there's things that can go wrong and all of this stuff as like a little mini game within the thing. I've done this with the exactly, because it's about player experience. Player experience is why I love
it
writing
creates
RPGs.
memorable moments and memorable moments. Right. So for
Exactly,
me, the thing I enjoy creating is none of those. I mean, I love creating all of them, but the one I like creating most is the lies. Because inevitably in almost all settings, there is the great supposed truth. And I love undermining them. I love looking at the big stories of the setting and then taking a look and saying what's actually going on. Because in many respects, that means that you can take somebody else's setting and then you can start proper world building there too. And it's one of the things that I find most exciting when I'm working on other people's IPs, which is often something that I was doing previously. And that was looking at the established stories and saying, well, what actually happened? And then using that as the source or a starting point for a campaign or for a story to be told. And often they can be really good for, say, a setting like Warhammer, where there's multiple authors, all of whom have put their own spin in it. Sometimes they contradict. And that's a good thing, because in the game, there's contradictory stories. Yeah. And then you can, as the GM, or if you're writing an adventure as the adventure writer, plumb underneath all of them and say, what inspired all of these different versions of reality? And then plug through to the truth behind all the lies. So what do I like building? Ultimately, cool stories. But in that regard, the lies that set through to the very heart of each one of the societies.
Gotta love an unreliable narrator.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Graham, on you go.
Well, I guess I've got two answers as well. One is definitely memorable moments, the things people will remember and talk about. And I do nasty things, like in a college Dungeons and Dragons game, I had a room covered by magical darkness because my players were fond of casting continual light on pebbles and tossing them ahead to, like flares in a night operation. So I had this room covered by magical darkness. They tossed a pebble in and found that the room contained a basilisk. What do you mean you're not looking at it? Because
of course,
wanted to know what was in the room. Yeah.
Nice.
And I don't think I was ever forgiven for that. But the more sensible answer is I like creating societies and cultures. It probably comes from the fact that I studied archaeology and a bit of anthropology at college. And so, how things work, the articulating points of culture and stuff like that. And that was one of the things I really appreciated about Glorantha back in the day, was it had that level of culture to it.
Yep.
Interesting.
Always loved
I'm going to be very controversial and say sorry, Demi, on you go. You can go first.
No, please continue.
Well, yeah, because I'm going to be controversial and say I don't like creating anything by myself. I really like creating collaboratively. Yeah. So like I like to add to things that are already there. If Andy's made a PC or an NPC for in a supplement, I'm like, yeah, but how could we, like, that seems a bit X. Let's change it to Y. And you do the same back to the people that you work with, Andy. But I'm definitely I like to. A blank sheet of paper for me is quite a painful process to get something down on it. So I like to collaborate.
Yeah. I find that collaboration always produces something that's greater than the sum of its parts.
Every time.
Every time.
Absolutely.
True. So I wanted to say two things very quickly. The first one is that in the meta we discussed before, you don't really write what the heroes know. You write what you know about the world. So effectively, this is the unadulterated truth of the world, not the truth the players know. Like, for example, if the world is run by two artificial intelligence that play God, that's what you write in the meta, because that is the truth of how you create your world based on the truth. What you're going to say to your players when you're writing the articles for that's a completely different issue altogether. And you very much like say, there are 12 gods. That's all you know, effectively. And the second thing I would like to say is because of the question between cities or people or nations, I strongly believe as a world builder that the story of the world is the story of the people who made it. And always you have to think about who led the march, who created this nation, what was the ideals infused in his leadership, because that's how nations are made and that's how policies are changing, essentially.
definitely.
We've got two final questions I'd really like to end on. So one is about Kilishandra saying, if I was creating my own world, what does World Anvil offer that would make it easier? But also a little follow-up to that, almost like 2 stars and a wish. World Anvil is good, but after 2 years, I found it has a steep learning curve. If you could rebuild it from the ground up, would you? And if so, what would you change? So what does it have to offer, and what could you do?
Oh, sit back and listen to this one.
No pressure
I
there.
want to take the first half, and then I'll let Dimi talk about the second half, because World Anvil is continually under development. We are always making it better. So Dimi could not just tell you about how he would do it; he can tell you about how he is improving it, because we're on a journey, we're on a mission, guys.
Okay, so it's kind of out there. Yeah, so yeah. Since Janet said it.
So I would say, in terms of what does World Anvil provide, do you ever lose your notes? You won't with World Anvil. Do you ever have problems with a blank page? World Anvil is full of world building prompts, so it can help you from the get-go. When you're thinking, I need a city, you open the city template. It's full of prompts helping you build that city. It's full of connections, so everything is connected together. It's got interactive maps, so if you have a map, you can just go, blonk, my city is here, and blonk, there's a city over there that's called such and such, and you can write 3 notes on it, and then you can come back to it later when you need to. In addition to that, it's got that whole meta, everything we've been talking about, the meta section, the idea of agile world building is baked in a section, and you are guided through that section. So you can create this big scaffolding if you want to. You don't have to. Apart from that, it's got timelines, it's got family trees, it's got diplomacy webs, which means that you can keep track of this stuff yourself, and you can also share it with your players if you want to. You can also choose which bits you want to share with your players and which bits you want to keep for yourself, which is one of the things that I like to do. So these are the kinds of things that help. I would also be remiss if I did not mention our incredible community. We have 1.6 million world builders using World Anvil. You can find 36,000 of them on our Discord, where people like to lift each other up. It is one of the nicest places on the internet. I'm allowed to say that because they say that. It's not from me. And my cat's really helping me again. And essentially, we want to help. That's what we do. That's kind of our motto. We want to help. We want to help people world build, and we want to help. And that is how World Anvil helps. I'm done. Now you talk.
Okay, I will ask Sigurd question then, essentially. So first of all, I would like to say that I'm painfully aware of more problems with World Anvil than you will ever know. One of my very common practices every some months is to introduce World Anvil to somebody who I know but never used it, and then record the video, as I did actually 4 days ago, and then sit down and listen to them absolutely wrecking it and learning every single time how we can do it better. And since we have about 40 to 50 people in this stream as well, I will say it. The reason that World Anvil does not have so many updates right now is because World Anvil is completely redone from the ground up at this point. Nobody knows that. This is the first time we ever announce it, actually. Ooh. Yes, that is a unique thing. World Anvil is being completely recreated from the ground up at this point. So yes, we are very aware of some problems, and we're going to fix them, all of them, or at least as many as we can find.
And these are things that will address that learning curve. So what we found is our tools work. We know they work. I use them for my own professional gigs. A lot of people do. But what we are working on is that learning curve and the things around the tools, essentially. So that's it's going to get better, essentially, and that's how we would rebuild it.
All right.
But we're learning every
single time. Building it.
Yeah, exactly.
But we're learning every day, and that's the thing. We listen, and that's how we actually know that World Anvil has problems, because we listen to you, and you know what? Everything has problems. The question is, how do you do it better every single time you work on it?
Yeah, exactly. I always use the Adobe Suite as an example. It's an amazing tool set. It's the professional standard. It's fantastic. Is it seamless? No. Are they fixing it? Yes.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I think that's us pretty much at the end of our hour of streaming. So
shocking.
Shocking. Yeah, we got there safely. No COVID-related disasters. I'm pleased to report at this end. Andy only had to cough on mute a few times. Yeah. So thank you so much to Janet and Demi, and also to the whole of World Anvil for hosting us today. This is the last episode of Inside the Rookery Season 2. So also a big thank you to all of our viewers, everyone who's made comments, pre-submitted questions, and of course all of our industry guests for the whole of Season 2. We couldn't do this without them. Look out for details of Season 3 coming soon through the Patreon, but also on our Discord server. And Andy, in the meantime, I think we have another cartography. He's looking surprised. He did ask me to hand over to him to talk about your cartography masterclass, which you'll have coming up soon.
Yes, between seasons, we're going to do another cartography masterclass. I'm going to take one of the maps that I posted online on my blog a wee while ago. It's a detailed close-up of a part of the Empire from Warhammer, and I'm going to show you how to turn that into a handout that can be used for players, but also to show you how to turn that into a GM reference that's also handout-esque, so that you've got something that looks like it's an in-character map, even though it's detailed and accurate for yourself. And I'll be showing you how to do both of them on the same map, so that they'll both do the same job. I hope. Yeah, I've done this many times. I've done this loads of times. It'll be easy. So yeah, that's what we're covering. That's going to be on the 10th, I believe, of next month. So that's on a Wednesday at 8 o'clock. I'll start and it'll be finished when we finish.
Excellent.
I like it.
Well, thank you so much for everyone for joining me, and I hope to see you all soon on Discord.
Whoa. Janet has an announcement to make.
Oh, Janet has an announcement.
I do have an announcement. I just wanted to tell all the World Anvil Beans that the Adventure April challenge, that was our one-shot challenge, is now officially closed. So congratulations to everyone who submitted. We had about 350 one-shots entered there. If you did participate, then you should have won a participation prize of over $100 from Roll20. So we'll be getting that to you. And then we'll start with the process of finding our shortlist and sending those to the judges as well. So more coming, but congratulations to everyone who participated. You're awesome.
Very nice.
Well done, everyone, and see you all soon.
Bye.